Thanks for clicking. We hope you enjoy the full hour of AITA stories, and they all include the full story. Enjoy. 1 AITA for not being friendly with my partner's daughters now that they've warmed up to me. Not the a-hole. I'm 42 dating Tim, 59, a widower. He's in banking. I'm a bartender. I know what it looks like. His two daughters thought the same thing. But he's broke as a joke, and I've got a trust fund. So, actually no. He's broke because he ran up 6 credit cards, second mortgage on the house, cashed out his retirement, everything and anything to get her the treatment she needed, and then to get treatment enough to see both daughters married. His daughters live 6 hours drive away. We drove to them for Christmas last year and the year before. They ignored me, dragged him away when he tried to include me, and prevented their husbands from making even small talk with me by talking over me. Year 1, Tim chastised them. They apologized to him, not me. They blamed the pain of seeing their dad with a woman who wasn't their mom. Year 2, they did it again. This year I told Tim not again. He could go. I would never ask him not to see his daughters for Christmas, but I'll stay here. Tim didn't love the idea because me going with him means we can share the responsibility of driving when his back starts to bother him. He hates to fly. His 2010 Death Trap is starting to go anyway, so I leased him a comfy luxury ride. My brother has a dealership. He called the girls, super excited that he'd be able to see them more often without having to worry about his back, who then blew up and accused him of spending their mother's money on a bull house and car to impress some bimbo bartender and didn't offer them a dime for their weddings. In the ensuing argument, it came out that they assumed there had been a life insurance policy, nor did they have any idea about the credit card debt or the second mortgage that the house was underwater on, or that Tim was looking at foreclosure and bankruptcy until he moved in with me. They did not realize it was my house, that he pays no bills save the water bill. Man takes excessive showers and shared groceries. Now the girls want my number. They're sorry I felt lonely at Christmas. They want to come visit and stay with us next year. Conveniently in summer, I live near a beach. I've told Tim absolutely not about giving out my number. I'm happy to be polite if they come to visit Tim, but we're not going to be friends. If they had talked to me for even 2 seconds, they'd have understood. I'm not shy about admitting the only thing I have ever contributed to my blessed financial state is not developing a crippling coke addiction like my cousin Danny did. Tim thinks I'm being too unforgiving. They would have warmed up to me eventually, but knowing how generous I am being with their father has made them warm up quicker. I maintain I don't care about now or later. They had their chance to not be catty brats over incorrect assumptions that I was taking advantage of him. 2 AITA for having to go with my boyfriend when he ate the last of my food while I was in the bathroom. So, my boyfriend, 24M, and I, 24F, went to a restaurant for only our second time, eating out together. This week has been really rough at work, and I asked him to go out for food, saying I needed to pick me up. I mentioned I wasn't super hungry since I'd already eaten, but I was really looking forward to having some dumplings and soup. I even talked about how excited I was for the dumplings during the drive there. When we ordered, I made it clear that I only wanted 4 dumplings and some soup. My boyfriend ordered 2 large mains for himself, since he has a bigger appetite. When the food arrived, I shared my soup with him and tasted a bite of his food, but I was mostly focused on my dumplings. When my dumplings came, I ate one before I needed to run to the bathroom. When I got back, he had eaten both of the remaining dumplings. I was really upset because I had been looking forward to them and only got to eat one. I told him how disappointed I was and called him selfish, saying he never thinks of me. I asked him to pay for how much he ate since I had specifically wanted those dumplings. I don't want to make a big deal out of it, but I feel like he should have asked before just taking them, especially since I had expressed how excited I was. AITA for getting upset, calling him out for being selfish and asking him to pay more. 4 AITA for refusing to be excited for my sister. 29F about her pregnancy when she has never met my 26F, children 3M, 2M. My sister, 29F, and I, 26F, have always had a troubled relationship and have never seen eye to eye. However, we do love each other and would hang out and get along as best as we could when we were younger. The problems all started when I got married to my husband, 30M, 5 years ago and had 2 children shortly after. Throughout my pregnancy, my sister didn't bother to check on me and completely took herself out of my life. I just assumed she was jealous or had some type of issue with me being pregnant. I was not prepared for what would happen after my first son, 3M, was born. She asked me for a picture of him shortly after he was born when we had not spoken the whole time I had been pregnant. I thought that maybe this was a turning point for us and we could finally get along. I was very wrong. She has never met either of my sons. I have offered to bring them to see her numerous times, but there was always an excuse. She never asked me how they were doing or showed any interest in them. My sister has even boasted about other kids that are her friends' children, but seems to hate her own nephews. I am so confused. The problem has now got even more complicated now that she has announced she is pregnant. I am happy for her, but I'm still hurt with how she has treated my children and how she treated me during my pregnancy. My mom, 65F, says I'm being selfish and to just let it go and be excited for her, but I'm finding it difficult. I'm super excited for her to be a mom, but I can't just forget how she treated me. I want to have a relationship with my niece or nephew, but I also don't know how possible that would be. I have reached out to my sister to resolve the issues we have, but she is genuinely not interested in resolving anything. She has only got in contact because she is now pregnant. Also, my mom has tried to talk to her, but she isn't interested and doesn't give her a reason why she doesn't want to see my kids either. I do think it's important to note that my mom wasn't happy about my pregnancies either and has not made an effort either. I was 23 when I had my first baby, and my mom thought I was too young and refused to be supportive through my pregnancy and did it again with my second. A little bit more context, I'm a people pleaser. I have always just apologized and let things slide in the past even if they really hurt me. So, AITA? Small update. I've spoken to my mom and I've set a boundary with her that she needs to stop pushing me to talk to my sister. I have asked that she apologize for how she treated me during my pregnancy and after, and if she can do that, then we can work on our relationship. Spent a few hours chatting, and she doesn't see what she did wrong, and so low contact for a while. My sister is continuing to contact me asking me to plan a baby shower, and I have as of now not responded. Update on sister. Has been blowing up my phone ever since she asked for a baby shower. I've muted her on everything. She is adamant that I need to plan this baby shower and be involved and to not ruin her special moment. She's also using the "we are adopted" card and saying how I'm her only real sister. But where has she been when I needed her? I will be speaking to my sister soon as I'm sure I know what to say. She makes me nervous and I don't want to get sidetracked with what I want to say. Update. I have spoken to my sister and told her I will not be planning her baby shower. The reaction was pretty volatile, yelling and cursing. She said I have never been happy for her and that I should be more mature. I addressed the fact that she hurt me when she didn't have contact with my children or even seem to care about them. She openly responded that she doesn't care about my brats and that her child will be better off than mine are. I told her she can't pick me up and drop me when she feels like it. I congratulated her and ended the call soon after this, as I didn't want to hear any more from her. She did admit to the fact that my mom has been feeding her information about my children whenever she asks, which makes me angry. I do not know how I will proceed from here. 5. AITA for teaching my daughter the importance of sleep. Just like any other kid, my 7-year-old daughter hates bedtime. If it's ever 9:59 and we tell her it's bedtime, then she will make a huge court case about how we are depriving her of 1 minute of her life. I always let it go, but this week when I told her it's bedtime at 10:05, she protested. Essentially, she didn't understand why she had to go to bed while the rest of us adults stayed up later. It's unfair that we get to enjoy the rest of our night while she has to go to bed early. I mean, she's not wrong. It definitely makes more sense for me to go to bed early as well, since all of us wake up roughly around the same time, but I needed her to understand the consequence of the trade-off between sleep and early mornings. So I told her, okay, she can stay up as long as she wants. Hell, if we go to bed, she can keep watching TV all night till the next morning. Her eyes glimmered, and she did her little victory dance before sitting on the sofa and enjoying her little win. My wife protested, saying that she'll be too tired for school tomorrow, and I said, that's the point. I went to bed and woke up at 7 a.m. Sure enough, my daughter slept on the sofa probably about 2 hours before I woke up. Understandably, getting her to wake up and get ready for school was a battle that neither of us enjoyed. I dropped her off at school and picked her up again after work. She was done with the day and slept in the car on the way home. Once we got home, she tried to go to bed, and I told her she can't because her swimming lesson is in an hour, so she needs to get ready for that. She cried, but I still forced her to go with her mom. She came back just barely able to make it through the day and tried making her way up the stairs again. I told her she forgot about her homework, and she started crying again. My wife said we should let her sleep, but I was firm on my stance that if we let her off the hook right now, then she will never understand the consequences of her decision. Delaying responsibilities due to factors within your control isn't okay, and I don't want her learning that it is. I helped her with her homework, and by the time it was 8, she was already in bed. The next night when it was 10, she didn't even protest, just started walking up to her bedroom and declined when I asked her if she wanted to stay up with us. I thought the mission was a success, but my wife questioned my parenting technique and said it was borderline neglectful and manipulative. I disagreed, but after a few conversations with friends and family, I'm slowly starting to doubt myself. So, Reddit AITA? 6 AITA for telling my husband I won't be going to his birthday dinner since he asked if I would leave early anyway. For context, I will be 38 weeks pregnant on my husband's birthday this year. The previous week, I reluctantly allowed his sister to pick my daughter up from school so she could spend the day with her and his parents. She does half days still. I say reluctantly because they have continuously crossed parental boundaries in the past, but that's a different story. It had been a while, and she loves them, and I truly want them to have a relationship, so I gave it another go. Anyway, my husband and I went to pick her up at his parents', and while there, his sister asked what he was doing for his birthday coming up. I had asked him a number of times already what he wanted to do, had thrown out some ideas for us to do as a family as well, but he never decided on anything. So, he says he doesn't have plans. She asked if he wanted her to make him dinner at her apartment then, and he said, yeah, that sounds good. It would be a family dinner. His parents, her partner, and our family. All good. Tonight, he said that we could drive separately because he doesn't want to leave early. He asked me at dinner if I would leave early with our daughter, so I could put her to bed. He wants to stay and drink and smoke and be up late. This majorly upset me because this whole pregnancy has not felt like a partnership whatsoever. He only made one of my several ultrasounds. I'm over 35, so get a good amount of them. Works almost every weekend voluntarily versus making plans with my daughter, and I put off doing things I physically cannot do for the nursery until the 3rd trimester I've been asking him to do since the 1st. I've also asked him to look into ways he can support me during birth, and not a single Google search has been made to that effect. I'm not sure if I'm being the crazy pregnant lady, but it certainly feels like he just wants to do whatever he wants without any regard to me carrying this child he told me desperately wanted. I was fine with one. Our birthdays are close. The baby's due date is only 2 days after mine, so I'll be 40 weeks from my birthday if she doesn't decide to arrive before then. So for my birthday, I don't get to do anything but be pregnant and wait for baby. It would be nice to feel like he wants to spend these special occasions with me / my daughter and I. He clearly is not empathetic to the fact that I can't go out and do these things for this period of time. So to be told to go home, he is hurtful. I told him that in that case, I don't even want to be there, and she my daughter, and I aren't going to dinner. Honestly, I would not be in a mood to celebrate and just get upset anyway. But it does constantly feel like, as much as he claims to be a family guy, spending quality time with us doesn't matter to him. 7 AITA for taking my daughter's college / future savings account. My late husband and I have 3 kids, Elena, 16, Lucas, 15, and Elizabeth, 10. My husband passed 4 years ago and had a large enough life insurance policy that I was able to pay off the house and had enough left over to nearly triple the kids' college funds. There is enough money in each of their accounts for them to go to a public university debt-free or at least 2 years in a private university without scholarships or financial aid. Elena has always had mental health/behavioral issues. She's been in therapy since she was 4 and until last year was attending an alternative school. Over the summer, she stole her dad's car and crashed it after I said she couldn't go on vacation with her friend. Luckily, she and the people in the other car were okay, but my insurance wouldn't cover the repairs to the other car. Her behavior escalated after that, and her therapist, and I decided it would be best for everyone if she went to a residential program for kids like her. She recommended a few places. I got to tour the facilities and speak with the staff, and even some students, and I chose what I believe is the best program for us. A couple weeks ago, my husband's parents asked how I was able to afford everything with the car and Elena's school. I make about $70,000 a year in an area where $100K for a family of 4 is considered low income, so it's a fairly valid question. I told them that all of this had to come out of Elena's savings account. There should still be enough in there for her to go to a community college and transfer to a state school, but she'd have to get a job to help pay for her expenses. They were so upset that I took this all out of Elena's account. They were saying it's not my money to give, everything was in my name, that she's a child and I can't screw her over for life over a mistake, and that it's favoritism by only taking from her account and not her siblings. They asked how she feels about it, and I told them she doesn't know yet and that we will break it to her when she's doing better in her program. Now they're even more upset with me. AITA for not allowing in-laws to be present on Christmas morning while our kids open gifts. Me, 28F, and my husband, 27M, disagree on how we should handle Christmas mornings. For perspective, I'm an only child. Christmas morning was always done at home with my parents, and after opening gifts, we'd head over to my grandparents to celebrate with them. They all still live local. My husband is the middle of 3, and they often had family that lived out of state. So Christmas morning was sometimes at their home, sometimes at a grandparent's out of state, etc. We alternate our holidays between Christmas and Thanksgiving with our families. Before having kids, we'd stay with them for a week or long weekend over Christmas. After having kids, I want to be home for Christmas morning and then spend the rest of the day with my family or his family depending on year. Our kids are still young, 2-1, but it is still such a special moment for me, and I want it to be sacred and intimate amongst the 4 of us. We only get so many years of little kids on Christmas morning, and I want to soak up every single moment. His parents live 3 hours away and are having his siblings come the 22nd to 30th. No one else has kids yet. I told my husband that we should have our kids open up presents on Christmas morning and then make the drive to their place shortly after. He is calling me selfish and inconsiderate of his parents' feelings because it would mean the world to them to watch the grandkids open presents from Santa. His mom has made comments in the past how Santa would always travel for them wherever they went, being passive-aggressive towards my feelings on it. We had the same argument last year. I told my husband that they had their turn with their own kids, and this is now about us and our children. I still want to see and celebrate with his family, but only after we have Christmas, just the 4 of us on that morning. Am I being unreasonable? TLDR. Husband thinks we shouldn't exclude his family from watching the kids open presents on Christmas morning, and I want that moment to be intimate to the 4 of us only, then head to his family after. Edit. I would be totally fine if grandparents wanted to come here for Christmas, but they already made plans to host at their house with everyone, so we will be traveling to them regardless and staying with them for several days. I just requested that we watch the kids open presents from us in our home and experience Christmas morning, just the 4 of us first before heading over to his parents. Kids will have presents to open at grandparents too. We all exchange gifts with extended family as well. 9 AITA for giving a homeless man food for my cousin's baby shower. Today my cousin hosted a baby shower at a local park. Not as big of a turnout as we expected due to cold weather, but we had a good time for the most part. Towards the tail end of the event, an old homeless man named Earl passed by and asked if we could spare a sandwich. Earl is cool. All he does is pick up trash, collect cans and bottles to recycle, and minds his own business. There was a lot of leftover food, so I made him a simple plate with a sandwich, chips, and grapes. I handed them over to Earl, who looked like he was going to cry, thanked me, and went on his way. My cousin, her sister, aunt, uncle, and guests from my cousin's husband's side of the family all told me I shouldn't give food to someone who wasn't invited, especially a bum. I pointed out that there were like 11 sandwiches, a dozen untouched croissants, and a bunch of charcuterie stuff left over. They said if I didn't pay them, don't give it away like an inconsiderate dick. Edit. To everyone saying nice things, maybe it's the few beers I've had tonight, but you guys really choke me up. Thank you. To the people saying I'm TA, I don't disagree with what I did wrong. I gave food away without asking and without chipping in. All I can say is that I genuinely did offer to Zell some money, but they thought I was being a smartass and finished with, don't do it again. To everyone telling me to cut them off, I'm sorry, but my cousins, aunt, and uncle are people who I grew up with. Unfortunately, they became super snooty after my cousin married a guy from a rich family, but they're still my family. I'll apologize for what I did wrong, but I'll let them know that I'm disappointed with how they treat the less fortunate. Especially when my aunt and uncle grew up poor in Mexico. We'll work through it eventually. Last, my cousin's husband is cool. He diffused the situation and got us all to move on. He's just kind of whipped and bullied by a snob of family. 10 AITA for telling my sister I am done being her caregiver. Not the a-hole. I, 16M, have a twin sister, 16F. Let's refer her to as Lara. Lara and me have splitting personalities, but for the most part we used to get along until high school. Since Lara was an outgoing person, she barely studied if at all. She was obsessed with TikTok and stuff. Now I'm not as outgoing as her. I mean, I still go out with friends, but only during the holidays and we do activities like basketball, but you get the gist. Due to her dismal academic performance compared to mine, I am always made to tutor her by my mom. My dad knows about this, but he's busy with work all the time and traveling for different meetings, so he isn't really involved in this situation. My mom is a som. Now I don't mind teaching her, except that every time I try to teach her, she always manages to throw a fit or a tantrum, and I get blamed if she does badly in a test. So I gave up. Next, she managed to fracture herself at a friend's house. Apparently, she slipped and missed the landing. Don't remember too much. Happened 3 to 4 weeks ago, and ended up in a cast. It should take approximately 2 months for her to recover, according to the doctor, and for the cast to be removed. They taught her how to use crutches at the hospital, but admittedly, she wasn't the best with it. Our house is 2 stories tall, and there's a staircase to go up to our bedrooms. She wants me to carry her all the time. Now, this isn't an issue for me. I am 5 feet 11 inches, she's 5 feet 7 inches, and am much heavier than her, except I am not free all the time, nor does she want to take the effort to use her crutches. For the past 1 to 2 weeks, I relented and had to do as she told, or else she threatened to complain to our mom, who's busy in her own social life, and gets fed up when we complain to her, except she takes out all the blame on me. The last straw is when she called for me to take her down the stairs to drink water while I was on a call with a friend, finishing a group project that was due the next day. I had enough, and after the call, I went to her room and told her I am not her damn caregiver all the time, and she needs to do stuff herself. Guess what she did? Called for mom, and I got into trouble again. AITA? Mini update. I spoke on the phone with my dad, and he did say that once he would be back from his NYC business trip, he would try and settle things. He agreed that my sister was acting really immaturely, but he did ask me to continue to help my sister in the meantime since she needs it. However, I take his words with a pinch of salt, as every time he returned backs, he's scheduled to go elsewhere for work trips or meet someone important in 5 to 6 days, although it's not always the case. 11 AITA for being an overachiever in my pregnancy. I'm 26, and I have a friend who is 26 as well. We met as part of a larger friend group and have gotten closer since we're both pregnant at the same time. I'm 28 weeks, and she's 23 weeks. We're still friends with the other girls and see them regularly, but we see each other weekly, go shopping, go out to eat, etc. The last month or so, she's been canceling plans a lot because she's not feeling well, which is understandable. Her husband is deployed, and she just has her sister near her, but her sister has a family. I told her each time to text me if she needs anything, that I'm only a call away. I also made her a lasagna, which she's been craving a lot, and had my husband drop it off. She came over yesterday when I was making cookies and cupcakes for my nephews. We were hanging out when she asked me what I did in the times our plans were canceled, so I started telling her that I caught up with an old friend who was in town, visited family, signed up for prenatal yoga, and I finished the last of our nursery shopping and started putting it together with my husband. She seemed to slump, so I asked her what was wrong, and she said that she wishes she could put her nursery with her husband. I gave her a side hug and told her I'm sorry that he's not here. Then to cheer her up, I asked her if she wanted our friends and I to come over and help her. It wouldn't be the same, but at least that way she'll have her girls with her. She stiffened, and I let her go to give her space and started icing the cookies and cupcakes. I asked her if she wanted some, but she shook her head and just kept staring at me before she asked quietly, why did I have to be this way? I asked her what she meant, and she just gestured in my direction and said like this, why do you always have to make me feel shitty about myself? I was shocked and asked her what I did, and she said that I was always an overachiever, but that she didn't think I'd try so hard in my pregnancy too. She started listing what I've been doing, which is baking/cooking food all the time, staying fit and going for walks and stuff, keeping my house spotless, still having an active sex life and a social life. I asked her if she wanted me to be miserable instead, and reminded her that I did those stuff even before getting pregnant. It's not like I was or am doing anything extraordinary, just regular life stuff. She shook her head and said that I just had to make her look like a lazy cow in comparison. I was gaping by this point, and what could I say? She was accusing me of something I apparently did by being myself, so I just asked her to please leave, and she did. I thought about sending her a text to make sure she's okay, but what would I even say? I asked advice from another third-party friend who doesn't know her, and she said that I should distance myself because she doesn't sound like a friend. I'm stuck in the middle because maybe my actions did make her feel bad, but on the other hand, why would they make her feel bad? 12 AITA for not letting my dad give his ticket to my brother. My brother, 28M, and I, 32M, don't have a good relationship. He treated me terribly during a difficult time in my life and hasn't apologized or shown any remorse. Despite this, I decided to forgive him for the sake of my parents and to keep the peace in the family. I've made it clear that I'm not looking for a closer relationship with him, but I'll show up to family events if invited. Fast forward to late December. There's a big cycling event happening, which my dad and I were both interested in attending since it's one of the few things we share a passion for. I thought it would be nice to go together, so I called him. He was excited, and I bought 2 tickets. Then my mom found out and totally freaked out because my brother, who lives abroad, might be in the country that day. She was worried it would be unfair to him if my dad and I spent time together without him. My dad, however, didn't even know if my brother would be home that day. Meanwhile, the tickets sold out, so I told my mom I couldn't get any more. I was relieved and thought I had saved myself from a fight about not wanting to go with him. She was really upset and called it a horrible situation. I told her I didn't think she should be acting this way over me simply inviting my dad to a cycling event. Last night, 14 days later, my dad called to tell me he was planning to offer my ticket to my brother since he thought it would make things easier. He doesn't know if my brother is in the country at that date or whether my brother is even interested in attending, but he would offer him the ticket anyway. I told him I didn't think that was right and that I wasn't going to any sports event with my brother. If it's such a big deal that I invited my dad to this event, then he could just stay home. I'm really heartbroken by this. I feel like I made a huge sacrifice by forgiving my brother, but it's never good enough. They always demand more, and now I can't even invite my father to an event. AITA for not wanting my dad to give his ticket to my brother and for standing my ground on this. 13 AITA for not attending my sister's baby shower after our miscarriage. I, 29F, and my husband, 29M, found out we were pregnant in April, 6 weeks after my sister announced her pregnancy. We were all thrilled, imagining our kids growing up as best friends. Unfortunately, in June we had a miscarriage. It was our second miscarriage that year, and it hit us hard. I struggled deeply, even having dark thoughts about ending my life. We tried to cope by booking a trip, listening to podcasts, attending therapy, and joining support groups, which helped somewhat. After the miscarriage, we became a bit distant from the family because I couldn't bear to see my sister pregnant. Whenever we went out to dinner, where we usually talked and shared about our lives, we just couldn't engage in conversations anymore. Most of the time, we went home early because it was too painful to see them. People would ask how her pregnancy was going, and she would share moments about her ultrasounds, checkups, and milestones. We couldn't participate in these conversations or even try to be happy for her because it triggered me and made me cry. 3 months later, my sister's wedding was approaching, followed by her baby shower/gender reveal the next day. We informed them in advance that while we would attend the wedding and celebrate with them, we couldn't make it to the baby shower. Being around pregnant women is a trigger for me, reminding me of our loss. They seemed to understand, but hoped we might change our minds, especially since my husband's family was coming to support us. We attended the wedding, brought a gift, picked up their wedding cake, and celebrated their special day. However, the next morning my older sister, not the pregnant one, sent me a long message, essentially saying, "Your sister was there for you during your milestones. Why can't you be there for her now? Focus your energy on her and move on already." I was devastated, feeling like a bad sister, and cried my eyes out. My husband was furious at the insensitivity and realized this was how the whole family felt. Now, we are seen as the bad guys for not attending the baby shower. So, AITA for not being there for my sister during her special day? Edit. We found out we were pregnant on March, lost our baby at 16 weeks. 14 AITA for snapping at my dad that family therapy is a waste of time because my stepmom and her kids just point fingers and I'm already 18 and on my way out anyways. Throw away for obvious reasons. My stepmom Sarah's kids do not like me or my dad, but they're more so angry at Sarah because her and their dad aren't together anymore. The issues are here because Sarah lied about the kind of person their dad actually was for most of their lives, so Sarah's kids worship him and blame Sarah for the marriage not working. We all go to family therapy, but the whole thing is a waste of time because Sarah and her kids just point fingers the whole time and aren't receptive to anything the therapist says. My dad forces me to come too, saying I'm also part of the family, but I didn't willingly marry into this mess, and I don't want anything to do with it. This week, I said I wanted to stay home because I had a lot of homework, including a huge presentation I had to rehearse for. My dad gave me the usual spiel about 2 hours of therapy a week not getting in the way of anything, and it's to make our family better. I was stressed about the presentation and snapped at my dad that family therapy is a waste of time. Sarah and her kids just want to point fingers, and I don't get why I have to be there because I'm 18 and on my way out anyway. I didn't marry into this family and don't want any part in their mess. My dad originally grounded me and took away my electronics. Luckily, he gave me my electronics back the same night, but then lectured me about how he was disappointed I can make time to help Sarah and the kids are struggling. You get the whole jazz. I still think there's no reason for me to be there, and me snapping at him was deserved. AITA? 15 AITA for walking out of the bridal salon when I found out my friends were making fun of me behind my back. I have 2 friends, Gabby and Shelly. All of us are 23 if that matters. We were roommates in college and stayed in the same city after graduation. While the 3 of us are close, I've always known that Gabby and Shelly are the closest. They have a really sweet friendship. Shelly is getting married. Gabby is the maid of honor, and I'm one of the bridesmaids. Over the weekend, I went with Shelly so she could look at wedding dresses. Gabby was supposed to come with us, but got called into work last minute. I helped Shelly pick out some dresses, then she went with a consultant to try them on. Shelly asked that I take pictures and videos on her phone to send to her mom and Gabby. I was getting the camera ready when a text from Gabby came through. I didn't mean to click on it and was instantly going to click back out when I saw one of my Instagram pictures in her private chat from earlier that morning. Both were making fun of me for the face I was making and my outfit choice. It didn't appear to be very good nature. I admit curiosity got the best of me, so I searched my name in the chat. I found multiple pictures that I, my boyfriend, or my mom have posted of myself, absolutely ripping them to shreds, ranging from selfies to pose shots to even a few baby pictures. They'd also make fun of me in general in terms of the way I talked, wore my hair, and the way I ate. This went back as far as I could tell, at least a year. My heart broke. It all felt so juvenile in high school. While we all joke around, I would never do this to them, nor have they ever even tried to instigate these types of conversations with me about the other one-on-one. I was in tears. As someone who was bullied all through middle and high school, it just brought me back to a horrible place. I put the phone in Shelly's purse and brought it to another employee, telling her to tell Shelly that I had to go. I drove home and had a long cry. Shelly texted me by the time I made it home, asking where I went. I said I was going home and we could talk later. When she did call a few hours later, she was understandably confused and hurt that I left. I told her what I found, explaining that I only looked further because of the initial text I accidentally saw. She went off on me for looking through her private texts and said those were none of my business. She also told me I shouldn't have left the store without saying anything. I said I didn't want to make a scene, but also knew I couldn't fake being happy for her. Shelly told me the texts were all in good fun, and clearly she loves me because I'm going to be her bridesmaid. She added that I'm only hurt because I chose to read all those texts. Later on, Gabby called to tell me that I invaded Shelly's privacy and hurt her by walking out. My boyfriend and mom think I did the right thing by walking out. But obviously, they're a little biased. I just want some unbiased looks. Was I an asshole to look through the texts and then leave? 16 AITA for ruining Christmas and being upset. The only gifts I got from my family were joke gifts, not the a-hole. Some background. My family likes to play pranks with Christmas and birthday gifts. It's nothing new. I, F21, as well as my 5 siblings from 29 to 37 years old, have all been pranked on our birthdays and on Christmas, and usually it's 1 or 2 gifts. This Christmas, though, I was the only person to get all joke gifts. For example, I unwrapped a MacBook from my brother, but when I opened it, it was just some chocolate, which I don't eat, so I gave it away, and the MacBook was actually given to my sister inside a bag she wanted. Another gift was what I thought was a book I put on my Christmas list was actually just a book cover put on a dictionary. When I asked my mom about the book, she told me she gave it to my sister-in-law. This went on with each present my siblings or parents had given me. AirPods was just a charger block, adapter. Gift cards were used and had $0 balance, a card with Monopoly money, and so on, totaling to about 12 joke gifts. I realized I went out of my way to get everyone something they wanted, or they didn't get anything. At this point, I was bummed, so I went to the living room to watch TV with my boyfriend. At dinner, they were all talking about how much they loved their gifts, and when my dad asked why I hadn't said anything about mine, I said there wasn't much to say. Everyone but my boyfriend laughed, and my mom said it was no big deal as everyone else also got some joke gifts. I told her every gift I got was a joke gifts, and that the ones they got was also followed by the real one. My dad told me I needed to relax, as I'm making a big deal about it, and I'd have next Christmas to get the stuff on my list. Not wanting to go back and forth, I told my boyfriend I wanted to leave, and we can spend the rest of Christmas break with his family, then go home. My family got mad and told me not to go, and to just stay because it wasn't serious. I left and put my phone on Do Not Disturb during the drive, and by the time we got to BS parents' house, I had several missed calls and texts from them calling me names like ungrateful, sensitive, and childish. They said I ruined Christmas and made my parents upset cause I left. The next day, I exchanged and opened gifts with my boyfriend and his family, and one of the gifts I had gotten was the book I wanted, the book my mom pretended to gift me. I posted it on my Instagram story, and not even 0 minutes after posting it, my sister sent a screenshot of my story to the family group chat. They basically got mad at me for leaving and telling me I ruined Christmas over some presents. They told me I owe everyone, especially my parents, an apology because my mom spent New Year's sad because of my actions. Now I just want an outside party to tell me if I'm TA here. Am I in the wrong for being upset about the gifts and for leaving? After reading their messages and sitting on this for a few days, I'm now feeling like maybe I was upset over nothing and need to apologize to them. Asterisk gonna edit as there may have been some misunderstanding. My Christmas list didn't include expensive gifts, nor was I upset I didn't receive expensive gifts. I was merely upset because of being pranked with everything I got and being the only person who didn't get a real present, that is all. Another thing I'll address is I didn't do anything to my family which would warrant them doing this. The last big argument I had was with my sister, which was over 1.5 years ago. Thank you for the replies, and I will try my best to reply to comments while I'm at work. Editing once more to add I participated in joke gifts when I was a kid, haven't participated in the last 10+ years because I didn't enjoy it or find it funny, which I do know. I will reply with more info if needed when I'm on break or have time to reply. And I am familiar with the term scapegoat, but truthfully don't fully understand, so I will research that as well. 17 AITA for saying I'll be driving myself and paying for my own room on the upcoming family vacation. So, I won't have to be a babysitter? I 23M was repeatedly stuck playing the part of helper and babysitter on family outings. I had to move out of my parents' house because I kept being forced to help watch my 3 nephews. Last year, we took a family vacation in summer to the coast. I rode along with my parents, and they paid for my hotel room. Only, I had to share that room with 3 rowdy boys because my sister and her husband wanted a room to themselves. I was promised time to do my own things on the vacation, but instead I ended up having to help with these kids. I complained to everyone about it, and was reminded I was there for free. And then we pretty much just did only one thing I wanted to do, which was tour an art gallery. I like doing this whenever I'm at the coast, but the kids find it boring. This year my parents have a beach trip planned for June, and they assumed I'd be riding along the same way as last year. But I refused. I said I'd be driving myself, and paying for my own hotel stay to have my own room. My parents were shocked, and tried to remind me of the cost. I said it was no worry. I've got a good job and a decent running car. I can more than afford it. That's when the buts started. I stated the previously listed things as why I'll be driving myself and paying for myself. I want to be able to enjoy this vacation as an adult and not be treated like a child like last year. My parents told my sister, and she called to blow up at me, that I'll be ruining the vacation if I'm off doing my own thing while she has to wrangle her 3 boys. I ended up yelling at her that last year all she did was rope me into her mess. I didn't really get to do much of anything I wanted to do, and I was treated like the bad guy for wanting to just go to an art gallery. I'm a grown man. I deserve my own vacation too. Now my sister is not speaking to me, and my parents are still trying to convince me to just ride with them to keep the peace. I'm still refusing, but the pressure is getting to me. AITA for not giving in? I know they'll have a pretty hard time when they won't have another person there to help. Edit. It's barely been an hour since I posted, but my sister is apparently a Reddit lurker in the mornings, and she saw my post. Not only is she furious with me, but she's also upset no one in the comments is siding with her. To make it short, she went on a big rant about how it's so hard to be a parent to triplets, and the least I could do is help because I'm young and single, and she needs a break. I stood my ground on my decision, and now she's calling our parents to get them involved. I'm expecting a call from them any minute. Update. Well, I'm off work now, so I can tell more of what went down. I guess you could say it's over. My sister got our parents involved, they looked at my post, and were absolutely horrified by the continuous influx of commenters. Yes, they're very angry with me that I posted here, but I told them that if they just listened to me to begin with, I'd have never needed to. I'm sick of the whole keep the peace mentality that sacrifices me to placate my sister. They in turn went off on my sister, and to make a long story short, the whole vacation has been canceled. The hotel wasn't booked yet anyway, but my parents are arguing with my sister is blaming me, and my nephews are crying because they aren't going to the beach. My sister called me at lunch and basically implied I have no life, which is why I have time to help. I recorded that and told our parents, and that's currently what they're fighting about. Small update. I wasn't going to update again. But here's a little more. Parents said that they won't ever push babysitting of my nephews on me again, and have agreed that what happened last year was unfair to me. Right now, they're very angry with my sister for telling me I should help her because she thinks I have no life. My sister is playing the victim, and my brother-in-law is basically saying nope to the whole mess and spending most of his time at work. Thank you to everyone who has commented. You made my day. Hi Reddit. Long-time lurker, first-time poster here. Throwaway account because I don't want my in-laws finding this. Honestly, I'm at my wit's end, and I need some outside opinions on this situation that's been brewing for years. Buckle up because this is going to be a long one. A little backstory. I, 35F, married my husband, Dan, 37M, 7 years ago. We've been together for 10 years total, and I genuinely love him more than anything. Dan is funny, kind, supportive, basically everything you'd want in a partner. But his family? Well, let's just say they've been a mixed bag from day one. Dan's family is big on traditions. They're one of those close-knit families that have Sunday dinners, themed game nights, and of course, elaborate holiday celebrations. I didn't grow up like that. My family was a little more laid back. We'd have a nice meal on Christmas Eve, open presents on Christmas morning, and spend the rest of the day relaxing in our pajamas. No pressure, no frills. So when I started joining Dan's family for the holidays, it was an adjustment. The first Christmas I spent with them, I was eager to make a good impression. Dan had talked up his mom's famous Christmas dinner for weeks, and I wanted to contribute something special. Cooking has always been a passion of mine, so I volunteered to bring my famous garlic mashed potatoes. They're a hit at every potluck, and Dan had raved about them to his family before. I spent hours perfecting those potatoes. Creamy Yukon Golds, roasted garlic, a touch of sour cream and butter. It was the best batch I'd ever made. I was nervous but excited to share them. When we arrived at his parents' house, his mom, Susan 60s, seemed polite enough at first. She thanked me for bringing the potatoes and said she'd set them out with the rest of the food. Here's where things started to go south. As we were sitting down to eat, Susan announced, "Well, I hope everyone enjoys dinner. And don't worry, I made the mashed potatoes too, just in case." She said it with a smile, but there was a weird edge to her tone. I brushed it off at first, thinking I was overanalyzing. But then, as people started serving themselves, I noticed no one was touching my potatoes. Like no one. They all went for Susan's version instead. Dan noticed too, and tried to break the awkwardness by spooning a big helping of my potatoes onto his plate. "These are amazing, babe," he said loudly, making a point to compliment them. His younger brother, Matt, 34M, snickered and said, "Well, moms are the original. Why mess with perfection?" Ouch. The rest of the night was a blur of polite small talk and passive-aggressive comments. Susan kept making little digs about how different my potatoes were. "Oh, I can really taste the garlic," she said at one point, wrinkling her nose. "I guess that's interesting." Another family member chimed in with, "Not everyone likes garlic, you know? It's a bold choice for a family meal." By the time we left, I was holding back tears. Dan tried to reassure me, saying his mom probably didn't mean anything by it. "She's just used to doing things her way," he said. "Don't take it personally." But it was hard not to take it personally when the pattern kept repeating itself year after year. The second year, the cookie incident. The following Christmas, I decided to play it safe and contribute dessert instead. Dan and I spent hours baking homemade sugar cookies, perfectly frosted little trees, snowflakes, and reindeer. When we arrived at Susan's, she looked at the cookies and said, "Oh, how cute. I made cookies too, but mine are the traditional kind." She wasn't lying. Her cookies were there, lined up on a separate tray with a handwritten label that said, "Grandma's famous sugar cookies." Once again, my contribution was practically ignored. When I asked Dan why his family seemed so resistant to trying anything I brought, he shrugged and said, "It's not you. They're just really attached to mom's cooking. It's kind of her thing." I tried to let it go, but the comments kept piling up. "Your cookies are so colorful," Susan said that year. "Almost too pretty to eat. Are they edible?" The straw that broke the camel's back. Last Christmas was the final nail in the coffin. By then, I had resigned myself to just eating whatever Susan made and not bringing anything of my own. But then, Dan suggested we host Christmas dinner at our house for a change. I thought this was a brilliant idea. Neutral territory, no competition, a chance to create new traditions. Susan reluctantly agreed, but insisted on helping with the menu. She emailed me a list of dishes she thought would be appropriate and even offered to bring a few of the essentials, like her signature green bean casserole. I should have known this wouldn't end well. The night of the dinner, Susan arrived with not just her casserole, but half a dozen other dishes. She claimed she was just trying to help, but ended up monopolizing the entire kitchen. She criticized everything I made, from the roast turkey. "Did you brine it? Oh, you didn't? That's brave." To the cranberry sauce, canned? I guess that's convenient. By the time everyone sat down to eat, I was so frazzled I could barely enjoy the meal. To top it off, Susan made a big show of passing around her green bean casserole first, saying, "This is the dish everyone's been waiting for. Why I'm drawing the line this year." So here we are, a month away from Christmas, and Dan is pressuring me to spend the holiday with his family again. I told him I'm done. I'm not going. I've had enough of Susan's passive-aggressive jabs, her constant need to overshadow everything I do, and the way the rest of the family just goes along with it. Dan thinks I'm overreacting and says it would be selfish not to go. He keeps reminding me that Christmas is about family and that Susan means well, but I'm tired of sacrificing my own happiness just to keep the peace. After I told Dan I wasn't going to his family's Christmas this year, I expected him to be upset, maybe even a little defensive about his mom. What I didn't expect was for him to call a full-blown family meeting to address the issue. Yep, you read that right. Apparently, Dan thought the best way to resolve this was to get everyone in the same room, to clear the air. He didn't give me much of a choice. I found out about it the night before when he casually mentioned, "Oh, by the way, we're going over to Mom's tomorrow to talk about Christmas." I was livid. "Dan, this isn't a group therapy session," I said. "Why are we involving your entire family in something that's between us?" He looked genuinely confused. "Because it's not just between us. This is about family traditions. Everyone deserves a say." I couldn't believe it. I told him I wasn't going, but he guilt-tripped me by saying it would look bad if I didn't show up. "How are we supposed to fix things if you won't even talk to them?" he asked. Reluctantly, I agreed, but I told him I wasn't going to sit there and let his mom steamroll me. The next day, we arrived at Susan's house to find the whole family waiting for us. Susan, Dan's dad, his brothers Matt and Jason, and even Matt's wife, Carly. It felt more like an intervention than a family meeting. Susan kicked things off by saying how disappointed she was to hear I didn't want to spend Christmas with them. "Christmas is about family," she said, looking at me with that saccharine smile of hers. "We've always welcomed you with open arms, and it hurts to think you don't feel the same way." I bit my tongue and let her finish, but it was hard not to roll my eyes. "I appreciate the sentiment," I said, trying to stay calm. "But I felt like an outsider at these gatherings for years. I can't keep putting myself in situations where I feel criticized and unwelcome." Susan looked genuinely shocked, like the idea of her being anything less than a perfect host had never crossed her mind. "Criticized? By who?" she asked. "By you," I said bluntly. "You've made passive-aggressive comments about every single thing I've ever brought to your dinners. The potatoes, the cookies, the turkey, it's like nothing I do is ever good enough." Dan's dad, a quiet guy who rarely speaks up, finally chimed in. "Come on, Susan. You know you could be a little opinionated." Susan gasped, clearly offended. "I'm just honest. I can't help it if I have high standards." Matt, of course, jumped to her defense. "Mom's just trying to keep the traditions alive. You can't expect everyone to love new recipes when we've been eating the same ones for decades." I turned to Carly, hoping for backup, but she just shrugged and said, "It's true. The green bean casserole is kind of a big deal in this family." I felt like I was losing my mind. "I'm not asking anyone to abandon their traditions," I said. "I'm just asking for a little respect. Is it so hard to let me contribute without tearing me down?" The ultimatum. Things really escalated when Dan finally spoke up. "Look, I get where both sides are coming from," he said. "But at the end of the day, this is about family. I don't think skipping Christmas is the answer." Susan jumped on that immediately. "Exactly. Thank you, Dan. It's not fair to punish the whole family over a few misunderstandings." I couldn't hold back anymore. "Misunderstandings? Susan, you've been undermining me for years, and everyone just lets it slide. I'm not asking for much. I just want to enjoy the holidays without feeling judged." The room went silent for a moment, and then Matt said something that completely set me off. "Maybe you're just too sensitive. Mom's like this with everyone." I laughed bitterly. "No, she's not. She's never criticized anything Carly's brought to a family dinner." Carly looked uncomfortable, but didn't deny it. At that point, I stood up and said, "I'm done. If you can't see why this is a problem, then maybe it's better if I don't come to Christmas at all." Dan followed me out, but he was visibly upset. "Why do you have to escalate things like that?" he asked on the drive home. "We were supposed to find a solution, not make it worse." I told him I wasn't going to sit there and let his family gaslight me into thinking I was the problem. "You've seen how your mom treats me, Dan. Why is it so hard for you to stand up for me?" He didn't have an answer. Where we stand now. It's been a few days since the meeting, and things are tense at home. Dan is still hoping I'll change my mind about Christmas, but I've made it clear I'm not budging. If he wants to go, that's fine. I won't stop him. But I refuse to spend another holiday being treated like a second-class citizen. Susan, meanwhile, has been texting Dan nonstop, asking if we've resolved the issue. She even offered to let me take the lead on Christmas dinner this year, but it felt more like a trap than a genuine olive branch. I told Dan I wasn't interested. I'm starting to wonder if this is about more than just Christmas. Dan's inability to stand up to his mom is becoming a major red flag, and I don't know how much longer I can put up with it. After the disastrous family meeting, things at home remained icy. Dan tried to act like nothing had happened, but I could tell he was frustrated. He spent most of his evenings glued to his phone, probably texting Susan about the situation. Every now and then, he'd sigh heavily and glance in my direction, like he was trying to muster the courage to say something. Finally, a few nights later, he broke the silence. Susan called again, he said as we sat in the living room. She wants to know if he'd be willing to meet her for coffee. "Just the two of you?" I put down my book and stared at him. "Why? So she can guilt-trip me into coming to Christmas?" "No thanks." Dan shifted uncomfortably. "I think she just wants to smooth things over. She feels bad about how the meeting went." I raised an eyebrow. "Did she actually say that? Or is that what you're hoping she feels?" He hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "Look, I know she's not perfect, but I really think she's trying. Can't you just give her a chance?" Part of me wanted to say no, but I knew that would only escalate the tension between us. Maybe meeting Susan one-on-one would give me a chance to explain how I felt without the entire family chiming in. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The coffee shop encounter. We met at a small cafe downtown, one of those cozy places with overstuffed chairs and indie music playing softly in the background. Susan was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table near the window with a cappuccino in front of her. She greeted me with a bright smile, but her eyes looked wary. "I'm so glad you came," she said as I sat down. "I was worried you wouldn't." I ordered a tea and tried to ease into the conversation, but Susan wasted no time getting to the point. "I want to apologize for how things went at the family meeting," she began. "That wasn't how I hoped it would go." I nodded, unsure of what to say. Susan wasn't exactly known for apologizing, and I wasn't convinced she was doing this out of genuine remorse. "I know I can be particular," she continued, choosing her words carefully. but it's only because I care so much about our traditions. I didn't mean to make you feel excluded. I took a sip of my tea and decided to be honest. It's not just about feeling excluded, Susan. It's about feeling disrespected. Every time I try to contribute, it's like you go out of your way to overshadow me. Her smile faltered. That's not true. I've always appreciated your efforts. I couldn't help but laugh. Really? Because it didn't feel that way when you brought your own mashed potatoes to my first Christmas dinner, or when you criticized my cookies for being too pretty. Susan's cheeks turned pink, and for a moment, she looked genuinely embarrassed. I didn't realize how that came across, she admitted. I guess I've been so focused on making everyone happy that I didn't stop to think about how it might affect you. It was a nice sentiment, but I wasn't ready to let her off the hook. It's not just about the food, Susan. It's about the way you treat me. The little comments, the dismissive tone, it all adds up, and it makes me feel like I'll never be good enough for your family. Susan was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she sighed. I never wanted you to feel that way. I suppose I've been too set in my ways. But I'd like to move past this if we can. A fragile agreement. By the end of our conversation, we'd reached what I can only describe as a tentative truce. Susan suggested we compromise for this year's Christmas by splitting the hosting duties. She would handle the main courses, and I could take charge of the desserts. I wasn't thrilled about the arrangement. It still felt like she was holding on to control, but I agreed, mainly for Dan's sake. At least this way, I'd have a chance to contribute without stepping on her toes. When I told Dan about the plan later that night, he was ecstatic. See? I knew you two could work things out, he said, pulling me into a hug. This is going to be the best Christmas yet. I didn't share his optimism, but I decided to give it a shot. Maybe this time would be different. The countdown begins. The weeks leading up to Christmas were a blur of baking, shopping, and preparing for the big day. I threw myself into making the best desserts I'd ever made. Classic yule logs, homemade truffles, and a stunning layered red velvet cake shaped like a Christmas tree. I wanted everything to be perfect, not just to impress Susan, but to prove to myself that I could rise above the drama. Meanwhile, Susan was busy planning her portion of the menu. She sent out multiple group texts detailing her dishes, complete with photos of the trial runs she was doing. It felt a little over the top, but I tried to ignore it. At least this year, I wouldn't have to worry about competing with her main courses. Or so I thought. The pre-dinner surprise. The night before Christmas, Dan and I packed up the desserts and drove to Susan's house. As soon as we walked in, I noticed something was off. The dining table was already set, and in the center was a giant, elaborately decorated cake. It looked almost identical to the one I had made. Susan greeted us with a big smile. "Oh, you made a cake too?" she said, glancing at the box I was carrying. "Great minds think alike." I stared at her, dumbfounded. I thought desserts were my responsibility this year. "They are," she said cheerfully. "But I just couldn't resist trying out a new recipe." "Don't worry. There's plenty of room for both cakes." I could feel my blood boiling, but I forced myself to smile and nod. There was no point in causing a scene, especially not in front of the rest of the family. But inside, I knew this was Susan's way of reminding me that no matter what I did, she would always find a way to upstage me. As I set up the rest of the desserts in the kitchen, Dan came over and put a hand on my shoulder. "Everything looks amazing," he said. "Don't let Mom get to you." I wanted to believe him, but the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. This wasn't just about desserts anymore, it was about control. And I was starting to realize that no matter how much effort I put in, Susan would never truly let me have a place in her family. Christmas morning was a flurry of last-minute preparations. Dan and I arrived at Susan's house early, as planned, to help set up. I carried my desserts into the kitchen, carefully placing each one on the counter. The yule log, the truffles, and my red velvet cake were my pride and joy, each meticulously crafted. I thought I was ready for whatever Susan might throw my way, but the tension in the air told me otherwise. The family began arriving shortly after noon. Dan's brothers, Matt and Jason, showed up with their respective families, each bearing wrapped gifts and bottles of wine. The house filled with the sound of laughter and holiday music, but underneath it all, I felt the same unease that had haunted every Christmas since I joined this family. Susan, of course, was in her element. She flitted around the house, greeting everyone warmly and basking in the compliments on our decorations and food. When it came time for dinner, she made a point of giving a little speech about the joy of family traditions before inviting everyone to dig in. A familiar pattern. As the meal progressed, I noticed a familiar pattern emerging. Everyone heaped praise on Susan's dishes. The perfectly glazed ham, the buttery rolls, and her infamous green bean casserole. But when it came to the desserts, there was a noticeable hesitation. My yule log and truffles sat untouched, while Susan's nearly identical cake became the centerpiece of conversation. "This is incredible, Mom," Matt said as he bit into a slice of her cake. "Did you make this from scratch?" "Of course," Susan replied, flashing a satisfied smile. "It's a family recipe. I thought it would be a nice addition this year." Dan, bless him, tried to steer the conversation toward my desserts. "You should try the yule log," he said, gesturing toward the untouched platter. "It's amazing. She worked so hard on it." But his effort was met with lukewarm enthusiasm. "Maybe later," Carly said, sipping her wine. "I'm so full already." I felt the familiar sting of rejection, but tried to brush it off. After all, I'd promised myself I wouldn't let Susan get to me this year. I focused on chatting with Dan's dad and playing with the kids, doing my best to stay out of Susan's orbit. The breaking point. The real trouble started after dinner, when Susan suggested we play a family trivia game, a holiday tradition, apparently. She passed out little notepads and pens, explaining that the questions would be a mix of general Christmas trivia and family-specific history. "Here's a fun one to start," she said, reading from her notepad. "What's the secret ingredient in Grandma's famous sugar cookies?" My stomach sank. I didn't need to write my answer to know I was about to be singled out. Sure enough, when it came time to reveal our answers, Susan glanced at my blank page and smirked. "Oh, don't feel bad if you didn't know this one," she said. "It's a family secret after all." The room erupted in laughter, and I forced a tight smile, pretending it didn't bother me. But inside, I was seething. This wasn't trivia. It was just another way for Susan to remind me I wasn't part of the inner circle. Dan must have sensed my frustration because he leaned over and whispered, "You're doing great. Just hang in there." I nodded, but his words did little to comfort me. The rest of the game continued in the same vein, with questions that highlighted Susan's role as the keeper of the family's traditions. By the time it was over, I was ready to scream. A line crossed. After the game, everyone moved back to the living room to exchange gifts. I stayed behind in the kitchen, needing a moment to collect myself. As I cleaned up the dessert table, Susan walked in, carrying an empty plate. "Your log looked lovely," she said in that patronizing tone I'd come to dread. "Maybe next year you'll have better luck with the presentation." I froze. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I'd heard her correctly. "Excuse me?" She gave me a thin smile. "Oh, don't take it personally. I'm just saying, desserts are tricky. It takes years of practice to get them just right." I put down the dish I was holding and turned to face her. "Susan, I've tried to be respectful. I've gone out of my way to contribute to these holidays without stepping on your toes. But no matter what I do, it's never good enough for you." "Why is that?" Her smile faltered. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've always appreciated your efforts." "No, you haven't," I said, my voice shaking. "You've made it a point to overshadow everything I do. And honestly, I'm done trying." For a moment, Susan looked genuinely stunned. Then she narrowed her eyes. "Well, I'm sorry you feel that way. But maybe if you spent less time trying to outshine everyone else, you'd have a better experience." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Outshine? Are you serious? All I've ever wanted was to be part of this family. But you've made it clear that there's no room for me." Before she could respond, Dan walked in, looking concerned. "Everything okay in here?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Fine," I said, grabbing my coat. "But I think it's time for me to go." The aftermath. Dan followed me outside, begging me to come back inside and talk things through, but I was done talking. "You've seen how she treats me, Dan," I said, my voice breaking. "And you just let it happen. I can't keep doing this." He looked torn, caught between his loyalty to his mom and his commitment to me. "I'll talk to her," he said finally. "We'll figure this out." I shook my head. "I don't think this is something you can fix, Dan. Your mom isn't going to change. And honestly, I'm not sure I can keep putting myself through this." Dan didn't say anything as I got into the car and drove away, leaving him standing in the driveway. As I pulled out of the neighborhood, I felt a strange mix of anger and relief. For the first time in years, I was standing up for myself. But at what cost? Driving home that night, my thoughts raced. I replayed the confrontation with Susan over and over, second-guessing everything I'd said. Was I too harsh? Should I have kept my composure? But every time I started to feel guilty, I remembered her patronizing tone, her dismissive comments, and the years of built-up resentment. This wasn't just about a holiday dinner or a cake. This was about respect, and how little of it I'd been given since the day I met Dan's family. When I got home, the silence felt deafening. I sat in the living room, staring at the twinkling lights on our Christmas tree, wondering what would happen next. A part of me expected Dan to walk through the door, ready to hash things out. But as the hours ticked by, I realized he wasn't coming home. Not yet. Dan's return. It wasn't until late the next morning that Dan finally came home. His face was drawn, and he looked like he hadn't slept much. I was still in my pajamas, nursing a cup of coffee at the kitchen table. When he walked in, I didn't say anything, waiting for him to speak first. "You left me in a really awkward position last night," he said, setting his keys down on the counter. I raised an eyebrow. "Awkward for you? Try being me for the past 5 years." Dan sighed and sat down across from me. "I talked to my mom after you left, and she said she didn't mean for things to escalate. She's willing to apologize if it means we can move past this." I nearly choked on my coffee. Apologize? After she practically accused me of trying to outshine her? That's rich. Dan held up his hands. "I'm not saying she was right, but can't we just take the olive branch and move on? It's Christmas, for God's sake." I stared at him, feeling a mix of disbelief and sadness. "Dan, this isn't about Christmas. It's about your mom treating me like I'm some kind of intruder in her family. And it's about you letting her get away with it." "That's not fair," he said defensively. "I've tried to stay neutral." "Neutral?" I interrupted. "Neutral isn't good enough. You're supposed to have my back, Dan. But every time your mom undermines me, you just sit there and let it happen. Do you have any idea how that feels?" He looked down at the table, avoiding my gaze. I didn't want to make things worse. "Well, congratulations," I said bitterly. "Because things are worse." Dan's perspective. To his credit, Dan did seem genuinely torn. He admitted that he'd been raised to see his mom as the ultimate authority in the family, and that challenging her wasn't easy for him. "She's always been intense," he said. "But she means well." I couldn't help but laugh at that. Meaning well doesn't excuse treating people like crap, Dan. At some point, you have to draw a line. He nodded slowly, but I could tell he was still struggling to reconcile his loyalty to Susan with his commitment to me. "What do you want me to do?" he asked finally. I took a deep breath, trying to choose my words carefully. "I want you to stand up for me. I want you to tell your mom that her behavior isn't okay, and that if she can't treat me with respect, we won't be spending holidays with her anymore." Dan's eyes widened. "You're asking me to choose between you and my families?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm asking you to set boundaries." "There's a difference." Susan's response. Later that day, Dan called Susan to relay what we discussed. I stayed in the other room, giving him space, but I could hear snippets of the conversation through the closed door. It started off calm enough, but it didn't take long for Susan's voice to rise. "What do you mean I need to apologize?" I already said I'd apologize. Why isn't that good enough? Dan tried to explain that it wasn't just about an apology, that it was about changing the way she interacted with me. But Susan wasn't having it. I've never treated her badly, she insisted. She's the one who's always trying to change everything. I could feel my blood pressure rising as I listened. Finally, Dan ended the call, looking more exhausted than ever. She's not happy, he said, stating the obvious. Did she agree to anything? I asked. He shrugged. She said she'd think about it. That was Susan's way of saying no without actually saying no, and we both knew it. An unexpected offer. The next day, I got an unexpected text from Carly, Matt's wife. Hey, I just wanted to say I saw what happened with Susan. You handled yourself well. Let me know if you ever need to vent. I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Carly had always been polite to me, but never particularly close. This felt like a shift. Thanks, I replied. It's been a rough couple of days. We ended up texting back and forth for a while, and Carly admitted that she'd had her own issues with Susan in the past. She's hard to deal with, she wrote. But she's worse with you. I think she sees you as competition. That last part hit me like a ton of bricks. Competition? For what? I wasn't trying to replace Susan or take over her traditions. I just wanted to be included. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Susan's need for control wasn't about me. It was about her own insecurities. A line in the sand. By the time Christmas Day rolled around, I knew I couldn't go back to Susan's house. Not without a real commitment from her to change. Dan went alone, reluctantly, while I stayed home and tried to enjoy a quiet day by myself. When Dan returned that evening, he looked defeated. It wasn't the same without you, he admitted, sitting down next to me on the couch. How'd it go? I asked. He hesitated. She didn't say anything about what happened. Just acted like everything was normal. I shook my head, unsurprised. That's exactly why I didn't go. Dan sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know what to do, honestly. I feel like I'm stuck in the middle. You're not in the middle, Dan, I said gently. You're choosing not to pick a side. And that's a choice in itself. He didn't respond, but I could tell my words hit home. That night, as we lay in bed, I realized this wasn't just a fight about Christmas. It was a turning point in our relationship. If Dan couldn't stand up for me now, what did that mean for our future? One thing was clear. Things couldn't go on like this. Not anymore. The week following Christmas was eerily quiet. Dan and I moved through the days like roommates rather than partners. The tension between us was palpable, but neither of us seemed ready to dive back into the conversation that had caused the rift. I buried myself in work, trying to distract myself from the unresolved conflict. Dan, meanwhile, threw himself into fixing small things around the house, tightening cabinet hinges, reorganizing the garage, anything to avoid the elephant in the room. But avoidance wasn't sustainable. One evening, as we sat on the couch in awkward silence, I finally broke. We need to talk, Dan, he sighed, setting down the book he'd been pretending to read. I know. Lay it all out. I turned to face him, tucking my legs beneath me. I need to know where you stand. Because right now, it feels like you're more worried about your mom's feelings than mine. Dan winced. That's not true. I'm just trying to keep the peace. At my expense, I said softly. Dan, your mom has made it clear she doesn't respect me. And every time you stay silent or try to smooth things over, it feels like you're choosing her side. He shook his head. It's not about sides. She's my mom. I can't just cut her off. I'm not asking you to, I said. But I need you to set boundaries. Real boundaries. Not just vague promises that things will get better. Dan rubbed his temples, looking exhausted. I don't know how to do that. She's not the kind of person who takes well to boundaries. That's exactly why you need to do it, I said firmly. If you don't stand up to her now, she's never going to change. And I can't keep living like this, Dan. I won't. Dan's decision. For the first time in days, Dan really looked at me, like he was seeing the toll this had taken on me. You're serious, he said finally. Dead serious. He nodded slowly, his expression shifting from defensive to determined. Okay, I'll talk to her. But I can't promise she'll listen. That's all I'm asking, I said. For you to try. The phone call. The next evening, Dan called Susan while I sat in the other room, trying not to eavesdrop. I could hear the muffled sound of her voice rising and falling, punctuated by Dan's attempts to interject. After what felt like an eternity, he walked into the room, his face a mixture of frustration and resignation. She didn't take it well, he admitted, sinking onto the couch beside me. What did she say? She accused me of taking your side, he said, running a hand through his hair. She said she's always tried to include you and that you're the one making things difficult. I let out a bitter laugh. Of course she did. I told her that wasn't true, Dan said quickly. I told her she needs to stop with the passive-aggressive comments and actually make an effort to treat you like part of the family. And Dan hesitated. She said she'll think about it. I roll my eyes, which means nothing will change. He sighed. Probably not. But at least I tried, right? Trying isn't enough, Dan, I said. If she refuses to respect me, there have to be consequences. Drawing the line. Dan nodded slowly. Okay, what do you want to do? I think we need to take a step back from your family, I said. At least for a while. No more holiday gatherings. No more family dinners. If she wants to see you, she can, but I'm not putting myself in that position again. Dan looked pained. You're serious about this? Completely. He leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. This is going to be hard. I know, I said softly. But it's the only way things are going to change. Susan's reaction. When Dan broke the news to Susan, her reaction was predictably dramatic. She called him 3 times in one day, alternating between anger and guilt trips. I don't understand why you're punishing me, she said during one call. All I've ever done is try to make the holidays special for everyone. You've made them special for you, Dan corrected. At the expense of everyone else, especially her. She's turning you against me, Susan accused. I always knew she'd do this. Dan held his ground, refusing to engage with her accusations. This isn't about her or me turning against you. It's about the way you treat people. And until you can respect her, we're taking a step back. Susan didn't respond, and Dan hung up the phone, looking both relieved and defeated. A new beginning. The following weeks felt like a reset for our relationship. Without the looming presence of Susan, things between Dan and me improved significantly. We spent more time together, rediscovering the connection that had been overshadowed by family drama. For New Year's Eve, we hosted a small gathering with a few friends, free from the weight of Susan's expectations. It was the first time in years that I felt truly relaxed during the holidays. Dan admitted that stepping back from his family was harder than he'd expected, but he also said it was freeing in a way he hadn't anticipated. I didn't realize how much pressure I was under until now, he said one evening. Me neither, I replied, smiling at him. But I'm glad we're doing this together. A turning point. As the months passed, Susan made a few half-hearted attempts to reach out, but Dan held firm on our boundaries. He told her that until she could acknowledge her behavior and make a genuine effort to change, things would remain as they were. It wasn't an easy road, but it was a necessary one. For the first time, I felt like Dan and I were truly a team, partners who could face anything together. And as for Susan, only time would tell if she was capable of real change. But for now, I was content to focus on the life Dan and I were building, one that was finally free from the shadow of her control. The following year brought clarity and growth in ways I hadn't expected. Setting boundaries with Susan had been painful, but it was the beginning of something healthier, for Dan, for me, and for our relationship. We spent most of that year rediscovering who we were as a couple without the ever-present influence of his family dynamics. For a while, Susan kept her distance. Dan saw her a handful of times, always in neutral settings, and their conversations remained polite but strained. She didn't bring up the previous Christmas or the boundaries we'd set, but her disappointment was palpable. Still, Dan stayed firm, reiterating that respect for me was non-negotiable. As the holidays approached, we decided to do something entirely different, a Christmas just for us. Redefining traditions. In the weeks leading up to Christmas, I threw myself into planning. I wanted to create something new and meaningful, traditions that were ours alone. We picked out a tree together, decorated it with mismatched ornaments from our travels, and spent a snowy Saturday baking cookies and laughing over the mess we made in the kitchen. Dan even suggested we attempt a Yule log again, a callback to the dessert that had been so emblematic of my struggles with Susan. This time, it wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was just for us, and that made it infinitely more enjoyable. On Christmas Eve, we exchanged one small gift each and curled up on the couch to watch It's a Wonderful Life. For the first time in years, the holiday felt light and joyful. A surprising gesture. Christmas morning brought an unexpected surprise. As Dan and I were opening our presents, his phone buzzed with a message. He glanced at it, his expression unreadable, before handing it to me. It was from Susan. Merry Christmas. I've been thinking about what you said last year. I realize now that I haven't been fair to either of you. I'm sorry for the way I've treated her, and I'd like to make things right. Let me know if we can talk sometime. I stared at the message, unsure how to feel. Was this genuine? Or just another attempt to smooth things over without addressing the real issues? What do you think? Dan asked cautiously. I don't know, I admitted. It sounds different, but I don't want to get my hopes up. Me neither, he said. But it's a start. Taking the first step, after some discussion, we decided to reply together. Dan drafted a message thanking her for reaching out and suggesting we meet after the holidays. I added a line of my own, expressing that I appreciated her willingness to apologize, but that I needed to see consistent effort if we were going to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't an easy message to send. I was still guarded, and part of me feared it would backfire. But I also knew that change couldn't happen without giving her the chance to prove herself. A Christmas for us. That evening, as Dan and I sat down to our simple, cozy Christmas dinner, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. This was what I'd wanted all along. Not perfection, not validation, but the freedom to create a holiday that reflected who we were as a couple. I didn't know what the future held with Susan. Maybe her message was the first step towards something better, or maybe it was another false start. Either way, I knew Dan and I were stronger now, and that was what mattered most. As we clinked our glasses and exchanged smiles, I realized I didn't need Susan's approval or anyone else's to feel like I belonged. I had built my own place in this family, not through her acceptance, but through the love and partnership Dan and I shared. And for the first time, Christmas felt like mine too. The end.